I'm Tom Foley. I'm the founder of the Connecticut Policy Institute, and we're extremely proud today to be hosting this event. It's a forum on education reform, and we're very excited that Governor Jeb Bush, who's been at the forefront of education reform, is able to join us today. We also are very grateful to General Electric Corporation for allowing us to use this venue, and also for their work in the education field, which they do through their Education Foundation. I just want to speak very briefly about the Connecticut Policy Institute, which I founded a year and a half ago. As many of you know, I ran for governor of this great state, and thank you. One of the things I learned about in running for governor and understanding the problems facing Connecticut, particularly in the area of education, is the importance of good policy and nonpartisan policy. So the Connecticut Policy Institute is nonpartisan. We focus on education policy and economic policy. We see them as integrally linked, because if you don't have good education policy, you're going to have problems with your economy down the road. So we've been working hard in these areas. We've published a number of white papers. This is actually our second forum on education reform. We also have an excellent executive director, Ben Zimmer, who's going to introduce Governor Jeb Bush. Ben was an undergraduate at Harvard College. He just graduated from Yale Law School. And so we're extremely lucky to have such a qualified an excellent young person running this organization. He's done an absolutely great job. So with that, I'm going to introduce Ben Zimmer, Executive Director of the Connecticut Policy Institute.
Thanks very much, Tom, and thank all of you, and especially Governor Bush, for coming. It's my pleasure today to introduce one of the nation's leaders in education reform and education policy, Governor Jeb Bush. And in doing so, I want to also provide a bit of brief context and background on education reform here in Connecticut and explain why it is that we felt it was so important to bring Governor Bush here to contribute to our state's ongoing dialogue. As many of you know, for much of the history of education reform in Connecticut, it focused on school funding and asymmetries in funding between wealthier and poorer districts. But today, though there still are certainly many issues related to school finance and school funding, in Connecticut, the 20 poorest districts spend as much per pupil on education as the 20 wealthiest. And I believe that after Greenwich, Hartford and New Haven spend the next most per pupil on education. So the question that, but nevertheless, Connecticut has the highest achievement gap, both in terms of racial minorities and socioeconomically in the country. So the question is, what can we as a state be doing in terms of structural reforms so that the money we're spending on our public education actually generates value and generates more value than it's getting now? And as anyone who follows Connecticut state government knows, this was a major feature of the last legislative session. And there was a bill passed with bipartisan support from the General Assembly and signed by Governor Malloy that I think everyone agrees includes a number of quite positive elements. I think there's a range of opinions in terms of how bold or modest some of those positive elements were, but wherever you fall on that spectrum, I think we can all agree that the job is not done. And education reform is something that you don't solve with one bill or one session, but it's something that requires continual energy and continual activism from every level of government and civil society. And it's with that view that the Connecticut Policy Institute has been doing our work on education reform. The idea is not to present some sort of alternative vision to that of Governor Malloy. The idea is not to provide competing ideas. The idea is that we're all in this together, and the question is, what actually works to improve underperforming schools. And that's what animates all our work in terms of education reform. And really in the whole country, there's no individual who's more familiar with the challenges, the importance, and if done right, the potential benefits of education reform than Governor Bush. When he took office in 1999, Florida was dead last in the country in terms of student achievement. But today, there's a completely different story. Obviously, you can measure educational output by tons of different metrics, but by pretty much any standard, Florida's above average, and even more importantly, on a positive trajectory going forward. Education Week magazine recently ranked them 5th in the country in terms of their improvement in public education outcomes. And since the Connecticut Policy Institute is data-driven, I'll just provide a few statistics to back that claim up. Between 2000 and 2007, only one state improved its graduation rate more than Florida. And between 2003 and 2009, no state made a bigger jump in 8th grade reading. And perhaps most importantly, these gains were particularly pronounced for minority students. The percentage of African American students scoring basic or better on the 4th grade NAEP test, reading test, increased from 31% in 1998 to 56% in 2009. And the percentage for Hispanic students increased from 46 to 71%, putting them nearly on par with their Caucasian peers, and almost, forget about having a large achievement gap, almost completely eliminating it for Hispanic students. These are incredibly impressive results that speak for themselves, and I think Connecticut as a state has a lot to learn from it. And perhaps even more importantly, or equally importantly, since leaving the governor's office, Governor Bush established the Foundation for Excellence in Education, which works to promote education reform through policy research and advocacy in states around the country. And as part of his role as chairman of that foundation, Governor Bush travels from state to state working with education leaders from both parties. He's actively collaborated with a number of Democrats in addition to Republicans to learn about what works, to share Florida's lessons, to share the lessons from other success stories, and really just to promote exactly what I was talking about earlier, promote good ideas about how we can improve our schools, whether their ideas originated from a Democratic person or a Republican person. It doesn't matter. His commitment is to improving the schools of our country, and that's the goal that we all have for Connecticut, and I'm honored and thrilled that he joined us today. So without further ado, Governor Jeb Bush. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. Bob, thank you for hosting us. GE is a great, you're lucky, anybody in Connecticut, if I hear anybody complaining about your corporate base that creates lots of high-wage jobs and prosperities, I'm going to spank them, or my mother will spank them. How about that? But more importantly, in my particular world, the GE Foundation is really committed to transforming education over the long haul with a command focus on something I'm going to talk about today as one of the next steps for education reform, which is having the courage to raise our expectations for the next generation before it's too late. So, Bob, thank you for hosting us. Ben, you know what? I think you're kind of slouching off a little bit, this Harvard-Yale combination. I think you need to go get a PhD from Oxford to go for the trifecta. Why not? After you change education here in Connecticut, that should be the next thing. I'm proud of what Florida has done. It's only gotten us into the game for maybe aspiring to improvement, but I'm proud of where, how we've gone from where we did, and I'm proud of the teachers and principals and a lot of people who were skeptics along the way. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Florida story, and maybe some of this will apply to you. But I tell you, 15 years ago, if I was asked to come here, it would be like me trying to give you advice about snow removal, being the governor of Florida. Florida's education system 15 years ago was, as Ben said, was bumping at the bottom. We had the lowest graduation rate of all the 50 states. The NAEP, this National Academic Education Progress Test, is considered America's report card. And we were 29th out of 31 states that administered the test, leading some, not me, Ben, not me, I promise you, to whisper, thank God for Mississippi and Louisiana in 1998. We were behind in a lot of ways. There was a complacency about our education system that was quite dangerous, I think, for a state like Florida. And at that time, and prior to that, in the 1980s, Connecticut was definitely a leader in education rankings. And I think the lesson is that leadership does matter, that you can build a coalition to move the needle on any policy. I happen to think education policy is the most important, but there are a lot of other ways that people can engage and make a difference to improve the human condition in all sorts of ways. But it requires all-in effort, and the opposite of doing nothing, atrophy sets in. Look at me. I mean, I clearly don't work out enough. Atrophy sets in. I got a nerve coming out of my second spinal column that makes it hard to stand up sometimes because I'm not organized in terms of physical discipline. And atrophy sets in policy. It sets in every aspect of what we do. And so doing nothing is not going to be neutral. It's not going to yield us kind of status quo. It will be yielding decline. Trying to do something and adapting and trying to change and moving the ball forward through trial and error will yield the kind of results that you should be proud of. So here's the deal. Kids who enter the 4th grade without basic reading skills face a much greater chance of dropping out and will create huge demands on any community in any state. 90% of the folks that receive welfare benefits and 75% of the people on food stamps are high school dropouts. There is a direct link, and increasingly so, between education outcomes and the ability to dream big dreams and live productive, independent lives. So complacency should not be an option, even in a prosperous, wonderful place like Connecticut. According to the NAEP, published every 2 years, in 1998, Connecticut 4th graders overall were 2.5 grade levels ahead of Florida 4th graders in reading. African American 4th graders in Connecticut were 1.5 grade levels above Florida's African American students. Quality public education is the only government program that can successfully cure poverty. Remember that Florida has 54% of its children qualify for free or reduced lunch. We're a state with a lot of families living near or at the poverty level, and we made a commitment to change that situation by focusing on a suite of reforms that started with strict accountability for schools, teachers, and students. We grade schools to ensure transparency so moms and dads know exactly where schools stand, and we did it in a way that was kind of crazy, A, B, C, D, and F. A focus on literacy in the early grades because with a focus on retention and remediation, a hard-edged gate, if you will, that if you can't get through, we're not going to, because of political correctness, let you pass and think that something good will happen down the road. More school choice, and then more school choice, and then more school choice. Higher academic standards, better teacher quality, and now a focus on digital learning options, which I think are transformational for the long-term future of our country. Connecticut, over the last generation of time, has decided to stand pat, really to focus on adults, with all due respect. This is a fantastic place. It's a beautiful state. You've got a lot of great things going for you. But when you stand pat and you focus on protecting the economic interests of the adults, students suffer. So Florida 4th graders since 1998 have gained 1.5 grade levels in reading, according to the NAEP, and our African American students have advanced 2 grade levels in this 10-year period of time. Connecticut 4th graders actually have lost ground, and African American Connecticut students have made no progress. As a result, our 4th graders today on this test that no one claims can be tested to or gamed or anything like that, the NAEP test, we have just about caught up with you, and my expectation is that if we stay focused on these reforms and Connecticut doesn't, just naturally we will be able to move ahead of this beautiful state. And what's remarkable, as I said about that, is this is a state with many kids in poverty. This is not a place of great affluence, although Anytime anybody from Connecticut that is affluent wants to move to Florida, no disrespect, Tom, come on down. We don't tax you that much. We'd love to have more affluent people in our state. I apologize. The devil made me do that. You can't take the governor out of a former governor, I guess. And we have, and not only do we have kids living in poverty, we have a large percentage of students that are limited English proficient. We have identified large number of students that have exceptional ed challenges. More than 500,000 of our 2.6 million students are ESE qualified. And interestingly enough, we have all-in per pupil funding, counting the federal monies, of $9,000 per student, $9,000 compared to the $15,000 that you all spend. So I'm here to tell you, I've looked into the future, and great things can happen to Connecticut if you're willing to move to a more student-centered system. And I'm not declaring victory for Florida, because this just gets us halfway to where we need to start, in my opinion. We need to benchmark Florida students to the best in the world, not to our neighbors or not to the other states that have done well in the past. For Floridians to be successful, I think political leadership requires to aspire to be as good as Singapore, to be as good as Hong Kong, to be as good as Korea, where there's a command focus on much higher level learning, and where there's a cultural value that is placed on this beyond just kind of a political system organized around our kids, that it's far bigger, it's something of great national purpose. So how does this play out? What's been the formula for success? I will start with accountability, because it sounds so simple, but accountability really does drive the alignment of interests towards greater learning. In Florida in 1999, we passed the A+ law. One lesson maybe for aspiring political folks is it's probably useful to say what you're going to do. Don't try to surprise people, and give them enough detail that will allow them to know that you're serious about it. Might be a good lesson for one of the candidates running for president right now, just a humble suggestion. Being specific and bold is what are people looking for. They don't have to agree with everything you say, but they want to know that you're all in. They want to know that you really believe these things, and that it's something of purpose to you, and that you have passion about it. And so I said we were going to grade schools A, B, C, D, and F, 100% based on student learning, half on proficiency, half on learning gains, that we'd give $100 per kid for schools that showed improvement or were A schools, that we would have no tolerance for F schools if they were F for 2 years in a row, that parents could move to a higher quality public school or a private school. That's what I said, and that's what we did. And it's amazing how everybody's interests began to align in a different way. Grading schools A, B, C, D, and F, 100% based on student learning, began the process of moving the needle. We were told along the way that it was harsh and unfair. I don't know if you all have been involved in education reform, but my gosh, the excuses that exist really can wear you out. It's not fair to have the same standard for kids in poverty than kids in affluence. Well, guess what? When you do that, when you immediately create a different standard, you get a lower result. It's not fair because parents aren't as involved in some places where they are in other places. And the minute you accept that, then you won't get the parental involvement that should be required. It's not fair to reward schools that show improvement or to show, that are A schools, and the response back was, it's easier to show learning gains than it is to achieve an A. And the net result of all this is the myths that exist, they exist here and they exist everywhere, began to diminish because we began to shatter them with incredible results. So the first step was accountability. Because the minute a school gets the scarlet letter of a D or an F, what happens? The first thing is the excuses. It's not fair, blah, blah, blah. The second thing that happens is, holy shnikes, this principal really isn't that good. He's popular, but he's not good. And Mrs. Jones, who's been teaching algebra for 25 years, doesn't really know how to do this. And we better make sure that she's given remedial help so that she can get better. And the first-year teacher, she had off-the-chart learning gains with her kids because she went to a great school, or she might have been a Teach for America teacher, or whatever it was. The data begins to drive the changes so that you get more of what you want, which is learning gains. And when you add $100 per student, which totaled to over, it's the largest merit-based pay system since 90% of it goes to teachers. You end up getting incentives aligned with the expectations, aligned with everybody recognizing how important this is. So what happens when you have robust accountability? Then you have to develop strategies that are school-based to get better learning. One of the things that we learned when we did this was teachers don't know how to teach reading, in Florida at least. I'm sure you got it all figured out up here. But the schools of education in Florida weren't that good at teaching kids how to teach reading, and so we decided that we were going to use federal money and our own money to teach every teacher how to teach reading, and we put reading coaches in every elementary school, starting with the Title I schools and expanding it, and then in middle schools. And guess what? Our reading scores went up because all of a sudden teachers knew how to teach reading better. The football coaches were involved. We have football in Florida. I don't know if you know that. They were teaching teachers how to teach reading. Every aspect of life was focused on literacy, particularly in the early grades, and we saw incredible gains in reading because it mattered. Principals were hired in F schools and they said, we're going to be a B school or an A school or I'm leaving this place. They made those kind of claims, and I guarantee you the intensity and passion to make that happen changed the dynamics of Florida schools in a way that was pretty impressive. I'll never forget in my second year, I brought this big, huge check down to Dillard Elementary School. If you know Fort Lauderdale, some of you may traipse around there a little bit. Dillard is a predominantly black high school, middle school, and elementary school with a great tradition. And it was an F elementary school. They brought in the most dynamic principal I'd ever met. And she made this vow, the vow that I just said. And the next year, they went to an A school. They hit it out of the park. So I'm coming to give this big, gigantic check, you know, it was like $100 per kid, so 300 kids, it's a pretty good number, and $35,000 check. No cuts by the district, by the way, straight to the school, could be spent on anything. I'm bringing this check in, and all of a sudden, the Dillard High School marching band comes in right behind me and literally blows the roof off the place. The difference between a high school cafeteria that may have floor-to-ceiling heights this way, if you've ever been to an elementary school cafeteria, it's like 6'4". And the noise of this, and the kids were so excited, TV cameras were on, it brought a sense of pride and enthusiasm for a place that was always told, now, you know, the color of your skin makes it harder, right? The level of poverty makes it harder, right? Kind of the subtle, what my brother used to call the soft bigotry of low expectations, it exists. It exists everywhere in our country, and we need to shatter those myths. And one of the ways is, the important first step, I think, is transparency that comes from robust accountability. I promise you that if you get to a point where you have a chance to grade schools based on student learning in a fair way, it will begin to move the needle very quickly. And the lowest performing kids will be the ones that will see the greatest gains, because this achievement gap, while it's not the only objective, I think, for a quality country, it has to be one of the great social challenges of our time, and it will move the needle to narrow the achievement gap. The second goal, I think, is to have an effective teacher in every classroom. Every study shows that an effective teacher truly matters, and an ineffective teacher matters in a devastating way as well. That great teachers can bring low-performing kids up, they can make higher-performing kids excel, and poor teachers almost doom a kid. If you have 2 or 3 years with an ineffective teacher, it creates learning gaps that makes it really, really hard to overcome. And yet our system is not designed around highly effective teachers. In fact, if you saw the recent debate and watching TV about the Chicago school district, you see that even modest changes yield strikes. Outrageous. I mean, I cannot imagine, I mean, that's not allowed in Florida, thank God, but I can't imagine teachers striking at the start of a school year for having things like prohibiting the use of allowing a principal to hire an effective teacher and being forced to hire a teacher that has had longer service as the only means by which they can accept a teacher that has left a school because they might be ineffective. This is America. This is how it works. We're just saying we're casting aside a whole generation rather than saying, let's make teaching a profession. Let's reward it when we have excellence. When we have mediocrity, let's develop strategies to improve the capabilities of teachers. And when we have abject failure that is consistent, find another job for a teacher that is damning the life of 20 to 30 children in each classroom that they teach. So to move in that direction, you have to change how we reward teaching. And in Florida now and many other states, there's an effort underway in dramatic ways to change this. Florida passed a law that eliminated tenure for all new teachers. You have one-year contracts. For those that had been in the teaching profession, they can keep their tenure if they have teacher evaluations on an annual basis that allows them to stay above the norm. They're going to lose their tenure if they have negative evaluations, and 50% of that evaluation has to be based on some objective test or an end-of-course exam. There are teacher peer review elements to this, and the principal decides the evaluation for the rest. This is the model that the Gates Foundation is embracing. It's the model that maybe 15 states are embracing, and I believe if you pay teachers more for greater learning gains, surprise, surprise, the chances are you're going to get more learning gains. And if you take highly ineffective teachers out of the classroom and replace them with ones that are effective, surprise, surprise, you'll get more learning gains. And if you pay teachers more in the underserved areas, those schools will benefit more and you'll get rising student achievement. And if you pay teachers more in the underserved courses, subject matter areas like science and math, surprise, surprise, kids will start doing better in math and science, which is a great challenge for our country. So the second reform that Connecticut could lead the way on, because no one is ahead of the game on this, is to move to treat the teaching profession as a profession and move it away from being a trade union. And if you did that, I guarantee you the needle would move in a very dramatic way. Last time I was with Bob was at the GE Foundation. I made a huge mistake. It shows you I've been out of politics a while. Someone asked me a question in the question and answer period in one of the settings, the second meeting that we had. I don't know, I got upset. I get passionate about this stuff, so I didn't get upset, but I had to make a statement, which was, I don't think there should be public unions, period. There's a conflict of interest here. Anyway, I said this, whether you agree or not, it's not the point. The fact was, my next meeting right after the speech was the head of the NEA. So we had a kind of I realized I had this meeting and I went, oh, yeah, brilliant, Jeb, brilliant. So the first thing I said was, how'd you like my speech? And he goes, you know, it was pretty good except for that part about not allowing for public, oh, yeah, I see why you wouldn't like that. Anyway, I do think that if you move the needle away from unionization towards professionalism, you'll get a better result. The third catalytic converter for improvement is school choice. Now this is the place, I don't know why, but this is the place that you would think choice is about as American as any concept, any value that we embrace in our country. Go down any supermarket. I do go to Publix on Lejeune, about 3 blocks from my house. Go down the milk section, for example, today. You got whole milk, right? 2% milk, skim milk. You got buttermilk. You got soy milk. You got milk that really isn't milk. You've got chocolate milk, vanilla milk, strawberry milk, goat milk, lactose intolerant people milk. I mean, there's got to be, I counted them last Saturday, there's like 25 in Publix, 25 different versions of milk. Now, is the world worse off or better off for us when we have an abundance of choices and we make informed decisions that are best for us and our unique needs? I happen to think that choice is a powerful tool to improve the human condition and make life better. And I know, if applied properly in our school system, that it will be a catalytic converter to improve all schools, because I've seen it firsthand in Florida. We have school choice options kind of like the milk aisle in Florida, and we keep in Publix, and we're constantly trying to find new ways to do this. And myths have been shattered along the way. And let me give you some examples. We have a corporate tax scholarship program for low-income kids. 50,000 kids this year will take advantage of that. It costs less per student in this because they're going to a private school than if they go to the traditional public school. So it saves the state money because these were kids in public school going to a private school. Their outcomes are improved, their parents are happier, their lives are better because they've made that choice that's best for their children. The McKay Scholarship Program, which is the one-of-a-kind, first of its kind, that would be a good place to start with robust choice in Connecticut in my mind, which is to say, if your child is exceptional ed qualified, qualifies for the IDEA federal law, which means they have some form of physical or learning disability. As you might know, every child in that category has an individual education plan. And it's theoretically, at least, it's always violated by, not always, but a lot of times violated by the district. The district and the parents sign a contract that says this is what you're going to get for the money that we get that's enhanced by the federal government. Not fully funded, unfortunately, but enhanced. In Florida, if a parent unilaterally decides they're not happy with that, they can take that money, the same dollar-for-dollar money, and go to a private option. 20,000 kids are having a better choice because we've empowered them. And these are fierce parents. These are kids with autism. These are kids that have dyslexia. They have learning disabilities. They sometimes have a hard time. We have a superintendent here in the school district here. I imagine he would confirm the fact that parents with these children with extraordinary challenges are fierce and tough, and sometimes a pain in the you-know-what, because they are the advocate of their children more than any other group of parents I've ever seen. So empowering them improves their chance to be able to do their duty as a great parent for their kids. We have the biggest pre-K program in the country, using government money to send, to subsidize pre-K 4-year-old programs. 150,000 kids go to private options. It's the largest voucher program in the country. We have the largest virtual school program in the country. This year, the estimate is 500,000 courses will be administered with about 250,000 students participating in the Florida Virtual School Program. We have the second highest number of students attending charter schools in the country. You total all this up, and roughly a third of our kids, close to a third, have some choice alternative different than the traditional school. So you would think, based on all that, based on what we are told, that there is very little chance that the public schools will benefit from this. In fact, what you're told over and over again about school choice is that it destroys public schools. Rewind back to the initial discussions about student achievement and what Florida did. This all happened because school choice created tension, created options, forced the traditional public schools to get better, which, by the way, forces the charter schools to get better, which forces the private schools to get better, because parents now have many choices and everybody has to be focused on the best possible outcome for their kids. School choice does not hurt student outcomes. It actually is the catalytic converter for sustaining those outcomes. And it is American to suggest, particularly parents that have no choices, that are trapped in failing schools, that are of low income, they can't send their kids, can't move to a better neighborhood where there's a better school, or can't afford a private school. This is a moral imperative as well. And I hope that you all shed all the political correctness and recognize that all schools get better when there is school choice. And the proof is, go look at the data in Florida, and go look at the data when Louisiana embarks on its journey for a major school choice program, and look at Indiana's test scores in 2 years when you see the learning gains that are brought to bear inside the traditional public schools because there is school choice. And that's the third element of, I think, what yields a more dynamic system. And the final thing I want to talk about, apart from apart from accountability and teacher effectiveness and clearly school choice, is that we need to raise the bar up. Our expectations for the next generation has to be dramatically higher. Korea in 1950-52 was probably the poorest country in the world. Maybe as poor as Haiti, 1950. Devastated by wars, invaded and occupied by the Japanese, thousands and thousands of people dead, a divided country, no natural resources, poor as all get out. Fast forward a little more than a generation, the literacy rate in Korea is higher than the United States. It's a first world country in every measurement. Its education outcomes are far superior than ours. They build world-class products. They build world-class cars. They build world-class computers. There are hardworking people that is well-educated, motivated to take on the challenges of the 21st century. Now, why is that? The principal reason in my mind is that education is a cultural value. It's a cultural value. So they didn't shy away from high expectations for their kids. In fact, I don't know if you recall the story that Arnie Duncan talks about when President Obama went to visit the president of Korea, and he said, "What's your biggest challenge in education?" to the president of Korea, and he said, "Parents are wanting to have a second language taught in second grade instead of third grade." There are Korean families that save all their money to send their kids to New Zealand for pre-K so that they can be prepared to be fluent in English to be able to meet the challenges of the 21st century. You know anybody that does that in the United States? So we have competition that is not in our neighborhood. You should not be so worried about Massachusetts, although that's a great place with high standards. It's actually the model for where we're moving in the country. But we have to aspire to a much higher level. If we're going to be the best country in the world, we should have higher expectations. And so the next iteration of this, and Florida began on this journey, but we were so far behind, is to move to Common Core state standards that are higher, fewer, require critical thinking skills, that will demand the best that we can possibly do for our children. My experience in this reform movement is that if you put the bar here, most people will get right past the bar. Some will get close. But if you put the bar here, it's strange. But most people will get right past that bar and right, you move the bar up and then you plan for it and you have the resources to train the teachers and you raise expectations and information so that people know that the change is coming, we will raise student learning unless we pull back. So Common Core state standards to me is a critical element of moving our education system into the 21st century. These standards are significantly more rigorous and they're more focused and they'll be more relevant so that someone who actually graduates from high school going forward will have the chance to be career ready or college ready. Sadly today in America, on average, a third of our kids are college and or career ready. A third. A third get a piece of paper, woohoo, I graduated from high school, but they apply to community college or their public university and they have to take remedial courses because they can't start college work. It's basically half of the graduates have to take remedial work in the greatest country in the world. It's just amazing that there are no, marches in the streets. It's amazing to me that people don't get angry about that. I mean, I'm angry because if not, I'd cry. A third of our kids don't even finish after we spend more per student than any country in the world. They don't graduate at all. Now, we all believe that America is exceptional. We all believe it's the greatest place in the world. We say it over and over again, so it must be true. But those are not leading indicators of a great nation. And we have to be honest with ourselves. And the first step is to raise the bar, benchmark to the world, not to mediocrity. And if you do that, it will be traumatic. But if Connecticut decided that we're going to be the leader, we're going to be the I'm not kidding state, we're going to have high standards and we're going to hold everybody to account to those standards, all of the lethargy of the past will go away. Because I guarantee you, with high expectations and a command commitment that you're not going to back down and that there's accountability between failure and improvement, you're going to get everybody organized to achieving this. Because no one wants to admit that a child is not capable of achieving his or her God-given talents. I've not heard anybody say that, at least out loud. They may have excuses that they mutter why it doesn't happen, but no one will admit that. And as a state and as a nation, if we all say that we should have higher expectations for every kid, we're going to get it. So GE is a leader in this. 46 states are working on this. In 2014, there will be a new assessment tool. There will be a new set of standards. And the question that I will leave you with is Connecticut going to be a leader, or are you going to sit back and think you can't do anything about it? Or worse yet, you're going to say, hey, it's pretty good here. My kids are going to an okay school. I don't have to worry about this. That's the question that if you answer in the affirmative, that Connecticut's going to be a leader, then it requires you to be involved in the political process. It requires it. You can't do this by sitting on the sidelines and chirping about it. You have to be engaged. If you're in the business community, you need to make this what you do outside of your work. to mobilize a world-class workforce requires implementation of Common Core standards in a meaningful way. If you have children in your school system and you think your school is okay, don't compare yourself to the school that's failing in a place where there is poverty. Compare your school to Stockholm, Sweden, or Singapore, or someplace where the kids are yearning to be better and to aspire to greatness. And they're having the tools to do so because there's higher expectations for every one of those children. And they're going to eat our lunch if we sit back complacency comparing one neighborhood to another. If you're a parent and you think that this is important, get involved in your PTA and start challenging the political correctness of the system that is there designed, sadly, to protect the status quo against new thinking and new ideas. And if you're a dreamer and you think you've got a great idea that could improve the chance for students to learn, do it. Make this the high priority in your life, because this is a place where you can make a difference, where people have a chance to live lives of purpose. This is far more important than policy or politics. This is about the future of the most incredible country in the face of the earth. And we're going to lose it if we tolerate the fact that only a third of our kids will be successful. And sadly, this great American notion that you can be what you want to be if you work hard and play by the rules, irrespective of where you came from or whether you got a vowel at the end of your name or the color of your skin or if you came from another country, that is going to be shattered unless we change this. We're not going to be a great nation unless we are aspirational, and the right to rise, which is defined by education outcomes today more than ever before, has to become back at the core of who we are as a nation. So that's the challenge to you guys. I hope you take up the challenge and make a difference for your state and for our country. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. I'm a former governor, so you don't get standing ovations. That was nice. Yeah, automatically. They always stood up for governors, even if they didn't like you. Yeah.
I love the quote by your brother. It's the only one I could use in certain circles without getting,
There are a few others that didn't work that well.
Oh, yeah. That was actually one of my favorites. Could you speak a little bit about the excuse that's always used for charter schools about the self-selection process? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, well,
because that's usually what comes back at us often.
Self-selection meaning parents get to choose?
No.
Yeah, that's kind of the point.
Is that, in fact, the kids that end up going to...
Yeah, first of all, I'm not aware of any charter school in the country that gets more... Yes. The question is the argument that charter schools are self-selected. The kids attending charter schools are self-selected, and that's the question. And, what's the counter-argument to that? The counter-argument is that in every case I'm aware of, almost all cases, not every one, there's a lottery. Charter schools are public schools. They're independent public schools. They're in fact what people, if you ask them what public schools should be like, are like. There's more local control. Principals kind of drive the decision making. They're community based. They take all comers in 95% of the cases. Some of them are aptitude tested if you like it, or thank God. I mean, imagine me going to a school of music that's a charter school. That wouldn't be fair. It would destroy the chance for all the other kids to learn how to sing because they were much more talented. So there are some cases of specialty charter schools where you have to audition if you're a dancer or a singer. But yeah, what the heck? I hope you think that that's okay. But by and large, you take all comers. So if it's self-selected in the sense that a mom is motivated to actually apply and therefore others don't, so the argument I would make is that's what we encourage. You can't have it both ways, public school system. You can't say it's not fair because parents aren't mobilized. And then when you give them the power to make choices and they do it, you say it's not fair because the other parents aren't. The experience in Florida shows that charter schools have gotten better. In fact, they do better with like-kind kids than traditional schools, but not by much. And public schools have gotten better. Both school systems have gotten better because the choice creates an alternative that refocuses the effort on student learning. And, you know, it's just a fact. I created the first charter school with Tal Fair, the head of the Greater Miami Urban League. It's called the Liberty City Charter School. Those parents chose. I guess that was bad. 90 kids, all African American, grades kindergarten through third, all near or at the poverty level, all wanting to have an impact on their children's education, all signing a contract with us that they would assure that their children did their homework. Most of them were single moms, some of them were single grandmoms, a few of them were intact families, not many. They wanted us to have corporal punishment in the contract. The school district didn't like that idea. I had to beg them because we were going to lose the chance to have this school if we were going to allow someone to whip their kids in school, which they all unanimously wanted for some reason. So they backed away from that. But you know what we did get, which I found remarkable? This was 1996 or 1997. We got an exemption from the pupil progression plan of this big beast, the Miami-Dade County school system, that required, they didn't call it sex ed, but there was like human development was the term for second graders and first graders. This is, you better check to see if they've got this in districts. I imagine in progressive Connecticut you probably got a little of this action too. So the parents said, hell no. And I said, hell no. And I said, we'll trade. I went to the chairman of the school district and said, look, I think I can get them, the parents who were adamant that there'd be corporal punishment. I think we'll give up corporal punishment if you allow moms and dads and families to teach sexual behavior to their kids. And they relented and we set up the school. Now, is it wrong to have parents involved? I'd say it's pretty damn good. And it made a difference in this school, and students got better. And to resist, you know, to withhold that opportunity for people because others don't take advantage of it, I'm not buying it. Yep.
Governor, first, thank you for, oh, okay, my mouth's big enough, everybody could hear me. But, Governor, first of all, thank you for coming up here to Connecticut today to share with us. I really appreciate it. Can you please discuss with us, we're all pretty much, I would assume, in agreement in the direction of the things that you're discussing here. Those, I don't want to point the finger, but those on the left would tend to argue and dispute a lot of these things that you brought forward to us. Governor Christie has taken a big stand against the teachers' unions and has been pretty much vilified by everybody. Can you discuss with us some of your situation with the unions and how you were able to move these things forward? Thank you.
I don't know if you see the tar mark on my forehead here. We didn't have a warm and cordial relationship with Florida's teachers union. I view it in one level as a failure on my part, but I think if you stand on principle, I was impatient and passionate, and I really wanted to do this fast and quick, and I wanted to get every possible thing I could get and then go after the next and go. So it's hard to, you know, find common ground with someone who's always in your face challenging you. And if I'd paused a little bit, I might have been able to find some consensus. But in retrospect, I kind of doubt it. I mean, I just don't. Unions are not organized. Their objective, it's not that unions don't care about student learning. They do. I'm sure they do. I think everybody says they do at least. But that's not their mission. Their core mission is to protect the economic interests of their members, plain and simple. And we should never separate, you know, you have to separate that function, which is the union's responsibility, and student learning. And when there's a conflict, which occasionally there was in Florida as we moved to this student-oriented system, you fight. When there's agreement, you don't have to fight on everything. But we fought a lot. We fought a lot. It just was a fact. There are other places that have found more common ground. They've not been as successful, I think, in the depth of their reforms, but every state will have a different path. Clearly, Chicago couldn't do what we did in Florida, it appears. You know, where the economic interest truly does drive this. I mean, when you're talking about $70,000 average pay and you're getting a 16% increase over 4 years, and your benefits total over $100,000 total, and you got a pretty good pension pension package, and you got $1 billion deficit that you're dealing with, and an unfunded pension liability that makes Chris Christie's challenge look pale by comparison, that is it shows how powerful the union is there. We didn't have the level of intensity in that regard. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Governor. There we go. I found your speech fascinating. Education is one of my primary concerns, especially in my public service. I'm running for the state senate in a district that's incredibly diverse and very much a microcosm of Connecticut. We have very wealthy areas and some areas that are not so wealthy. What I most picked up on in your speech was the idea of making education a cultural value. Yeah. How do you do that?
Well, we tried to do it all sorts of crazy ways. I'll give you some examples of how you can try to change culture. That's not an easy thing, by the way. I'm not claiming success on this. I'd be doing something really special if I could change culture. But, for example, reading. Reading's at the core of learning. Sometimes we forget that part and assume that the little tykes can learn all these complicated things without really learning the basic literacy skills that are necessary to be successful. So apart from putting coaches to teach teachers how to teach reading, we created a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal of 200,000 mentors in our schools with a focus on third grade, because that's the gateway to learning. In fourth grade, you begin to learn things. Up till then, you're learning how to read so that you can learn things in fourth grade. So we actually benchmarked it. We polled. We found out we had 106,000 volunteers spending some quality time with a young person, not necessarily in classrooms. And so we actually got a little money from the state, and we got a lot of support from the private sector. And we created, Colin Powell came down to highlight this. We made a big deal of it to get 200,000 mentors in our schools in 5 years. And each year we measured it. We gave every state employee an hour off per week with pay, as long as they were in a classroom with a struggling reader or in a mentoring relationship with, it didn't have to be third grade, but that was what the focus was. We created Teen Trendsetters, which is a cool program, by the way, that you guys ought to do too, which is to recruit leaders in 11th grade that are entering 12th grade, where they recruit their peers and they go mentor third graders, because younger mentors are incredibly valuable for younger kids that are struggling. There's a direct connection there, and it made a difference. And we had huge corporate support for that. We hit it on every possible cylinder, if you will, and we got 206,000 or 207,000 mentors in 2.5 years. I believe that made a difference in improving our results, but it also made people aware that this is not some abstract thing that's separate from them, that it really mattered. So another idea that we had was Bill Gates had this thing I saw and I stole, which was called Think Week. This is really nerdy, so this is Gatesian, if you can imagine this guy. This is right up his alley. He would take a vacation 1 week a year apparently, where he would send out an email to all Microsoft employees and said, "Any good ideas you got? I'm going on vacation. I'd love to read them." So imagine, it was like 100,000 people, all really smart and well educated. They all had great ideas. So I'm sure he had, just binders or digital binders of great ideas. So I decided I was going to go take my 1 week vacation. And I did the same thing. And someone sent me an email saying, and I sent it out to a bunch of people outside of government. And a middle school teacher said, "Break the Guinness Book of World Records on simultaneous book reads." So I thought, hey, great idea, steal it. So we created a process, which I do not recommend that Connecticut does, to break the Guinness Book of World Records in simultaneous book reads. We got Dave Barry was the co-author of the prequel to Peter Pan, and we got a Disney character and myself, and we televised our looking goofy reading from this prequel to Peter Pan at Disney World, and we broadcast that out to some 250 middle schools, And we monitor. The problem with this is it's just a nightmare logistically, but we did it, and we had 235,000 middle school students simultaneously reading in remote locations the prequel to Peter Pan, and it got huge attention. So we put the School of Education building, the Department of Education building has a sign that says "Just Read Florida" on it. I think they may have finally taken it down. The old guy left, but we tried to hit this on every possible way. Now that's the precursor to changing culture, really. Family literacy, I think, is a huge element of this. And my mom's foundation that I'm the co-chair with my sister is focused on funding outcome-based literacy programs to make sure that moms and dads, the first teachers of our children, learn how to read so that their kids don't have these huge gaps when they get to kindergarten. There are literally hundreds of things that people can do, churches and synagogues can do, community leaders can do, businesses can do, elected officials can do, and if everybody does these things, the cumulative effect of this is that you change culture. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. It's the 1,000 actions, not the one big thing that changes who we are, right? It's how we interact with one another. It's what our values are, it's what are our priorities, and whoever figures out how to change the culture to make education an enduring core value of their community that might be a contagion that makes a state think that way, that then becomes the model for the other states, patent it, because it'll be hugely important. One more.
I guess everyone can hear me. What are the chances of having another Bush in the White House? That wasn't really my question. I assume you had a chance to review. No, it was, but we love you here.
Let's just say that you're not into foreplay, are you? That's my line for anybody that says that, so it always gets a pretty good laugh.
I assume you had a chance to look at Connecticut's programs and the things that we're doing here in the state. What would you say is the best thing that we're doing, and on the other side, perhaps the worst?
I'm not. I'm not on the worst spot. That's not my role here. I think the fact that there was an effort for an ambitious across the board agenda. The lesson that I learned in Florida is there's no one quick fix. There's not one single thing. There's no silver bullet. And what appeared to me was there was an effort, a bipartisan effort, which is spectacular. It's always easier when you can do it that way, for comprehensive reform, broad-based reform. And it may not have been exactly what everybody wanted. It looked like it got watered down a little bit because the status quo forces are pretty strong and powerful, or at least there's a perception that they are. And so I think that is a success, that you've started on the journey of transformation of how the governance of schools and how they operate. The hardest part is to start. And once you do it, so now you got elections, and there were some people that supported these things and some people that opposed it, and maybe the people that supported it may get reelected, and they're empowered because, hey, it turns out I didn't get my behind, chewed into by unions when they threatened me and, said that if you vote for this thing, you're gonna get beat. We're gonna bring resources and try to whoop you. It turns out you're still up and taking nourishment. Next session comes, maybe you try to expand on the reforms, and maybe there's more success, and maybe you build coalitions around it where low-income families begin to see that this is in their economic interest to empower their families to make a difference in their lives. And maybe you start finding that there are strange coalitions, which is what we found in Florida, unique people that never probably agreed with much politically began to have kindred spirits as it relates to this. This is what happens if you're engaged and you try. So I think the success has been that you tried, and that you can try again, and you can try again, and you'll get better results. And when you get better academic results, it'll validate what you did and it'll allow you the next step to move forward. And you should encourage people in elected life to be big and bold. And when you do that, I think good things can happen. This is a process, not a not a checklist. Okay, I check this off, now I'm going to talk about juvenile justice. This is a process of reform. It'll take a while, but stick with it. And thank you for allowing me to come.